It is 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time on this Friday, August 24th, and this is an update from 28storms.com on the latest on Tropical Storm Isaac. As of the official 5 p.m. Eastern Time advisory from the National Hurricane Center, Isaac has gotten a little stronger. Maximum sustained winds are now up to 65 miles per hour, and the pressure has decreased to 994 millibars, which is another indicator of intensification. Tropical storm watches are now in effect for much of South Florida, and the storm is still forecast to move directly over the Florida Keys sometime Sunday evening before becoming a hurricane 2 p.m. Monday as it heads off in the general direction of the Florida Panhandle. However, in the 4 to 5 day forecast time range, I want people to focus more so on the cone of error, as there is still a lot of model disagreement with tracks ranging from as far west as southeast Louisiana to as far east as the Big Bend region of Florida. As you can see with the latest 18Z run from the Tropical Model Suite, there has been a slight northerly and easterly adjustment within this model set. We've got more models taking the storm closer towards South Florida, so tropical storm conditions are likely not only across the Keys but also the southern Florida peninsula as well. And as we go into 72 and 96 hours, we do see more models taking the storm toward the north in the general direction of the Big Bend region, but we still have quite a few that's over across the western half of the Florida Panhandle, and there are still a couple of very significant models that are fairly accurate, at least overall, that are a bit west of here toward Mississippi and Alabama. The 12Z GFS ensemble members were also somewhat at odds with each other as they still show several different possible solutions. We've got a number of models taking the storm directly up the Florida Peninsula, although at this time the main consensus is out across the Florida Panhandle, and we still have quite a few models within the GFS ensemble that are still off toward the west near Mississippi and Mobile. Nearly all of the intensity models do suggest strengthening throughout the next 3 to 4 days. However, interaction with western Haiti and Cuba continues to be the wild card, and until this system clears Cuba, the intensity forecast once it moves out across the Gulf of Mexico is still somewhat in question. Nonetheless, Isaac is becoming better defined this afternoon. There's no question about it. This is the best that the tropical storm has looked since it has developed, and you can see that we now are tracking one primary surface circulation that is situated just to the south of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, so it appears to be tracking to the northwest now. It has started to make that bend toward the north, as has been the forecast from the National Hurricane Center. And it still has a long way to go before it becomes a hurricane, but it is getting there. We still have much of the main convection out toward the south and east of the circulation, and for this thing to really take off, you want to see the convection start to develop near that inner core, and we're just not quite seeing that just yet. Also, within the past 2 hours, if we go back to the visible really quickly, we had some questions as to whether or not this was an eye starting to form. The truth is, the convection really has not developed near the inner core quite as much, so we have more so just of a gap in the convection there. That's really not a clear-cut eye just yet. In fact, it's really not an eye. It's going to have to develop a little bit more, and we will just have to wait and see if that happens before it reaches Cuba. But so far, the current forecast is keeping it below hurricane status until it starts to re-intensify once over the southeast Gulf of Mexico. Overall, the zoomed-in floater water vapor imagery shows a continued favorable pattern out across the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, with the outflow pattern continuing to expand in nearly all quadrants. Over the next 24 hours, we are likely to see Isaac continuing to move in a general northwest fashion, thus crossing western Haiti and moving out across eastern Cuba. This is what the latest 12Z run of the GFS is indicating, and as we go into early Sunday morning, the storm should be along the northern coast of Cuba. If it starts to move a little bit to the north of the country, then we could start to see a little bit more in the way of intensification. And as the Hurricane Center mentioned in their 5 p.m. discussion, those tropical storm watches for South Florida may have to be replaced by hurricane watches if they have to increase the intensity forecast. Also, the latest runs from the models are indicating that South Florida impacts could begin a little bit earlier than what was originally thought. This is now Sunday afternoon, and you can see the storm is bearing down on the Miami metropolitan area along with the Florida Keys. So Sunday, the conditions are going to rapidly begin to deteriorate, and as we go into Sunday night and Monday, we should be seeing tropical storm impacts across much of the southern half of the Florida Peninsula. Now, as we go later on into Monday and into Tuesday, the model is still seeing some ridging to the north, but apparently the GFS is not quite as strong with that ridge as what we had seen in prior runs, and so the latest shift has been toward the east just a little bit with a landfall near Apalachicola, but this is still a 96-hour 4-day forecast, so we're talking about next Tuesday morning, and this can still range a little bit more to the west or a little bit more toward the east. The operational GFS and the GFS ensemble mean are in relatively good agreement this afternoon. You can see in 48 hours and 72 hours the storm is forecast to be over southwest Florida and the extreme southeast Gulf of Mexico. The ridging to the north is still there over the Carolinas, but within 72 to 96 hours, the models do have this trough diving out of the Great Lakes just enough to where they have a weakness in the ridge as we go into day 4, and that is why the GFS is a little bit more toward the east than the run yesterday. But viewers must also keep in mind that the GFS does have the tendency to sometimes overdevelop these troughs, so if anything, we are going to be closely monitoring whether or not the GFS starts to shift at least a tad more to the west as we get closer to this time period. And finally, as we go into day 5, the latest GFS ensemble does have the remnants of the storm moving into Georgia and the Carolinas, as it is still fully captured by the trough over the east coast. In addition, we still have a lot of model disagreement between days 3 and 4. This is now the latest 12Z run from the European model, and within the first 24 to 48 hours there is fairly good agreement. The European is rather close to the Florida Keys with a developing hurricane, and once Isaac gets into the southeast Gulf to the south of the ridging that the European has a little bit more across the southeast compared to the GFS, the storm is allowed to intensify under very favorable conditions to the south of Apalachicola, and the trough is not quite as amplified over the mid-Atlantic. In fact, the ridging out across the central United States is stronger within the European. Therefore, the European is suggesting more of a northwesterly track, and this forecast is actually slightly more to the west of the previous run from the European that was available 12 hours ago. This is late Tuesday evening, and the storm is forecast to be making landfall along the Mississippi and Alabama coastline. So we have seen a clustering of the models slightly toward the east this afternoon, with Panama City and Apalachicola along with the Big Bend certainly being in play here. But once again, we cannot discount the very accurate ECMWF model that is a little stronger with the ridging out across the southeast, and it's implying a track more toward the west. So all interest from southeast Louisiana through much of Florida, including all of the Florida Peninsula, needs to keep up with Isaac, as we still have a lot of very significant details that we need to iron out before we can be overly confident about any particular forecast at this time, and the intensity is still somewhat up in the air until the storm clears Cuba. So please stay tuned. We will have more continuous updates here at 28storms.com throughout the duration of this tropical storm threat.